All right, welcome back everyone to Jface Games. Today I'm talking about Vagabond, and if you don't know, Vagabond is currently, today is the 10th of September, currently on Gamefound, and it's already made its goal, but I think that it could probably get a few more backers. I'm not trying to push the game on you, but I think it's got a lot of merit to it, and I'm going to talk through it in my normal style here on Jface Games. We're going to talk about, if you're coming here for flavor, that's not really my strong suit. I kind of talk straight mechanics because a lot of the people that follow me are kind of designing their own game. But if you like mechanics and that's how you kind of get interested in games, stick around. All right, so Vagabond is pulp fantasy role-playing, and I think it's got a lot of neat stuff because it's really trying to streamline the process. I did a video a while back on I guess it would have been called the alpha back when they kickstarted, and it's changed a lot. I think it's changed a lot, and some of the nomenclature's changed, and that's why I wanted to do this video again, because the only video I have on it is from the alpha. So let's get going. So it is still a rollover D20 system. So in other words, you have a D20, and you're going to have a skill, and your skill is going to be something. So to this effect, your skill might be like, your attribute might be like a 5 or a 6 or a 2 or a 3. And then if you have a skill that you're trained in, then what happens is you double that. So let's say your attribute is a 5 and you are trained in whatever that weapon is potentially. Well, now you have a 10. And so now you would do 20 minus 10. So you have to roll a 10 or higher, right? So you can get really good, because you can get an attribute up to 7. You can start the game with a 7 in an attribute. So in essence, you might be right off the bat, you have to get a 6 or higher to succeed. That feels pretty good, right? Now, that's the primary, that is the primary resolution, but there are other dice mechanics to be aware of. You have countdown dice, which are the same as usage dice from, I believe that was, started with a C, I can't remember off the top of my head. But that's in essence where you have a die, and if you roll a 1 on that die, the die takes a step down. So if you have a D8 and you roll a 1, it becomes a D6. You keep rolling that during certain scenarios, etc. It has exploding dice, where if you get a 6, or if you get the maximum number on a die, you roll again. And then there's a sequential dice, where you roll 2D6, and 1 6 is the tens number, and 1 is the singles digit. And those are for different reasons you might be doing that. Now, it has a critical system that's variable depending on what you're doing. And I really love this because I just did a video recently on the plot die from the Cosmere TTRPG, and I loved that there was so much variability in what a critical meant. And so same here. So a critical in this system, when you get an attack, you don't do plus your stat for damage unless you get a critical. So that's on a D20 on it. Criticals are when you roll a natural 20. If you're doing a skill check and you get a critical, you get a plus luck, which is really nice. And we'll talk about luck as a meta currency later. If you're making a save of some sort, you get an extra action. And if you're casting a spell, spells can be either cast for their effect or they can be cast for damage, or both. And if you're casting it for damage, you get plus your stat, just like with an attack. If you're casting it for an effect, you get luck. This is really cool because I've had plenty of times where players have rolled 20s during a skill check and you're like, feels good because you did it, but then it's up to the DM to figure out, like, how do you extra do it? And here you get luck. And luck is like a fate point, right? It's something that you're going to be able to spend to take control over the narrative, so to speak. All of this is nicely laid out. This is the quick start guide, which is free to download currently. And all of this that I've kind of gone through is laid out in this first page. It's very clean. Everything's very clean and quick. And if you understand games, then you're going to be able to understand this very quickly, and you're going to fly right through it, right? I'm going to head down to because the next thing I talk about typically is character design, and I'll head down to the characters. Now, there are some really fun classes in this system. They have obviously the bard, the fighter. You have your classic classes, but then you have things like the luminary, and you have the pugilist, I think it's pugilist, the rogue, the wizard, and then that's what they have in the quick start. I think there's like 15 of these things, or 16 or 14, I don't know. There's a lot. They have the dancer, I believe, and the merchant. Some really fun ideas, and a lot of these Terran is actually created for the DM's Guild for D&D 5e, some of these, like the Dancer, I believe, and the Merchant as well. There's a ton of ancestries. There's only 4 in this, but if you looked at the... I don't know if it's the same as with the Alpha. I haven't checked into that, but there was like, you could be a Mimic, you could be a Bugbear, you could be any ancestry previously. So there's a ton of ancestries. We're not going to go through all those. There are 5 stats, in essence. You have Might, Dexterity, Awareness, Logic, and Presence, and these act kind of like, you know, you've kind of packed in the D&D 6 into 5 a little bit more cleanly, I guess you could say. And then luck is the 6th one, but luck is literally more of a meta currency. So whatever you choose for your array, here are your standard arrays. For instance, if you rolled a 6, if you rolled a 6 and you had a 7 in your standard array, you could make that your luck. And you could just be a halfling that has massive luck and you take control of the narrative like crazy. So that's kind of cool. I really like that. The classes, there's a ton, and the classes have really nice abilities, right? In this playtest, you only have the first 2 features, but they're very thematic. They feel good, and so I really liked a lot of these features and how they play off sort of the tropes that are these kind of character classes. What I also really liked is this little feature here. There's a nice little flavor text here for those that are wanting sort of ideas of how that character class might play out. So if you look here, you can see here are some iconic fighters: Beowulf, Gilgamesh, Gimli, Rama, Sir Lancelot. So I think that's fun. I think that's fun to hear those and see those. The other thing that I put in here for abilities are perks, and I believe these kind of work just like feats. But you can see here is a massive list of perks that are based on your archetype. So depending on what kind of archetype you are, so every class has an archetype. And depending on what kind of archetype you are, you have access to different types of feats. And once again, these are kind of pseudo rule breakers, ways that you can do a little bit extra stuff. Like, maybe you can attack with a ranged weapon at close range without suffering some sort of hindrance or etc. Those kind of things. And so those are really nice. I thought that going through those, I thought they gave a lot of flavor. And they really make it, like, for instance, there was one where I think it's this word. I don't know how to pronounce that word. I'm not very well literate, I guess you could say. And it was like if you missed on an attack with a ranged weapon, it didn't alert them that you actually attacked them, right? That's really cool, depending on the kind of class you're trying to be. If you're some sort of assassin, that would make a ton of sense, right? I'm not going to go through this like I normally would go through a game because I want to kind of go through it a little more quickly. Let's go into combat. So combat is side-based initiative. So that means if you're aware of side-based, one side, either all the bad guys go and then all the good guys go, that kind of thing. And the way it's determined is a d6. You roll a d6. If it's low, 1 to 3, the enemies go first, and that's considered the off turn. And then if it's 4 to 6, it's the heroes go first, and that's considered the turn. Now, that's important to know this off turn versus turn because the actions you get are going to be based on that. Now, from my understanding, the players then can go in any order they want, and they can figure out what they kind of want to do. But then at that point in time, I thought this was nice too. This game is also designed for solo play. So there's a lot of mechanizing, like trying to figure out rules to help you mechanize monsters so that you don't have to really kind of make those calls on your own if you're doing a single player game. But the benefit of that is if you're a DM who doesn't like that stuff, where you're trying to figure out what does this mean, roll tables are so helpful. And so here's a nice little reaction roll table. What's the situation of the NPCs when you meet them? You roll 2d6, you figure out, what am I dealing with, right? That's really nice. I like those kind of things. Now, the action economy, you're going to get an attack, or you're going to get an action on your turn, and then you're also going to have move, and your move is based on your speed, and your speed, I believe, was based on your ancestry. I have to go back and look at that one. But you have a speed, right? And your speed is going to be, let's say your speed is 5, right? That comes into play because you're going to be able to use that to move 5 spaces, and range in this system is close is 5 feet, near is 5 to 30 feet, far is 30 feet plus, and every move is technically 5 feet. It's like squares. And so we'll take that in mind, but you can move and then do your action and then continue to move if you wanted to. On your actions, you can either attack, you can cast, which is cast a spell. You can hold, which this means that you can either continue to take your action on the off turn, or you can take some movement on the off turn. Now that's important because once again, the off turn is when the enemy's going. So now you can actually set up different things, right? And that's kind of cool, right? Let's just give an example of like flanking. We haven't looked at flanking yet, but say you wanted to finish your turn here, but you save your movement for your off turn, and then another buddy goes running in first, and then you're waiting to see what the monsters are doing before you decide if you want to go in, and then finally you see that the one that was closest to you moves away, and so now you run in or whatever. Like that's kind of cool because this sounds to me like setups, right? You can improvise, you can rush, which means you're going to move double your speed, and then you can use an item. Now, this is where it's kind of cool, right? Because this movement comes into effect with dodging, and it comes into effect with these disengage jumps and stand. Because if I want to disengage, I have to spend 2 move, right? And that's so that I don't get an attack of opportunity or an intercept, they call it, on me. If I'm going to jump, etc., that costs movement. Now, if I want to dodge, dodging is you can only dodge something. It's like, in essence, it's a off-turn sort of reaction of sorts. You can only do it if you have movement left over, right? You have to have 1 move left over. So now it's not that I have a reaction on my turn I have to use. It's I saved this meta currency of move to be able to dodge, and I'm going to burn that in order to do it. I think that's pretty cool. Intercept once turn. A being can make 1 melee attack against a target on an off turn if that target either moves out of reach or makes a ranged attack or cast while it's close to you, etc. So this is your attack of opportunity. Now, attacking is you're rolling over your skill. So whatever your skill is, you're figuring that out. If you have a ranged weapon and you're close to someone, you're going to potentially provoke an intercept, but you're also going to have hindered. Now, we haven't talked about hindered, but this is underneath modifications to roll. These are your standard kind of idea of disadvantage versus advantage. Favor and favored is advantage. Hinder and hindered is disadvantage. So you're going to take 2 dice. You're going to roll them both, and you're going to keep the higher of them if it's advantage, or you're going to keep the lower of them with disadvantage, right? In your defense now is armor is a damage reduction. Enemies do roll damage, or there's the static number, sort of like standard, with like I should say standard with like Dungeon Dragons. But then you have these 3 defensive stats. You have dodge, endure, or will. And this is cool because I liked dodge a lot. Dodge is the idea that, here it is. Once again, you have to have, if you are targeted with an attack and your speed is higher than 0, you can try to dodge, right? And we talked about this before. This is this dodging here, right? You're going to dodge. And this is when you can try to make them miss your attack. And the dodge difficulty is going to be, whatever your dodge still is. So this is your main way of dealing with damage. So an enemy's going to attack you. They're going to hit you, right? It's going to happen. You have a choice. Am I going to take this hit because I have armor? Or am I going to try and dodge it? And if I'm going to try and dodge it, I have to have not moved my full turn. That's the decision, right? I think that's a cool decision, or at least that's how I interpreted it. I hope that's how it's actually. Otherwise, if it's not something that you can dodge, if it's something else, you're going to have to endure it, or you're going to have to make a will save against it. Now, there are a ton of conditions, and I have not read through all of them, so I wanted to just pick a couple, because I think there's a couple, for instance, for a lot of us that we are curious about in terms of mechanics. So let's just go to the ones that I think of. So let's go to flanked. Flanked is usually a hot mess in some games. So at least 2 enemies are close to it and on opposite sides. It is vulnerable for the purposes of melee attacks and dodge checks. So it's vulnerable. What is vulnerable? Vulnerable, exposed, and left open to attack. Its attack checks and checks using might and dexterity are hindered, and attack checks and checks using might and dexterity made against it are favored. Okay, so you have advantage in essence. So if you're flanking someone, you have advantage. So that's same to, I believe, Dungeons & Dragons mechanics. I want to look here real quick because I want to see if I said that correctly. Yeah, I did say that correctly, because it doesn't look like there is a skill check for, here is a griffin, and the griffin doesn't have a skill check, so it's not making a check to try and hit someone. It's just going to hit, which I love that if that's the case. About monsters, I'm going to just say this real quick because I thought this was really clever too, is that you have a tagline of frontline, midline, or backline for a monster, and it's actually built into the mechanics of the monster, letting you know where it should be. And then these frontline, midline, and backline are, once again, you're talking about automating monsters for single-player games. If it's frontline, it will move close and attack. If it's midline, it will move close to attack, and if the target isn't bloodied, it'll disengage. So bloodied being like half health. So if it's attacking you and you're not at half health, it's going to try to disengage and get some distance, right? And if it's backline, it tries to stay far away from you. I like this, right? I was just looking at the One Ring and its stances mechanic, and I thought that was really interesting. And this kind of, I'm starting to like this idea, right? What else do we have? Let me go. We got environmental conditions, blah, 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 luck. All right. So here are the things you can do with luck. Your luck, you can spend it. And when you spend it, you're going to get either advantage on a d20, or you get to re-roll a die you just rolled and you didn't like. My favorite one is plot armor. First off, I love the name plot armor for it. But in essence, what this is if you ever get to 0 health in this game, you're dead. That's it. It's over. Plot armor is you spend a luck to go from 0 to 1 hit point. So I'm sure you have to come up with a thematic way as to why that occurred. I love it. I love plot armor. That's probably my favorite. And then you can spend a luck to either do an extra d6 damage or an extra d6 healing. So this is probably my favorite rule in the game, is this making it so that 0 means something. You're dead. There's no negative. There's no death saves. But giving you this plot armor and calling it plot armor, I really love. Now, final things. Magic system, you have mana, so you have a meta currency, mana. You cast a spell and you have to choose, am I going to do this spell for its damage, or am I going to do it for its effect? And different spells have options, right? You know, they have different spells have a damage and an effect if you want. If you can spend a mana, you can do both the damage and the effect. So now, base damage for magic is always a d6. You can spend extra mana. Down here, you can spend extra mana to do more damage. Every mana you spend does an extra d6. So spend 3 mana, do 46. I could be wrong on this, but it didn't look like there was a cast check. I got to use the cast action to cast damage, but it didn't say there was a cast check to see if it happened. So it might just be you just damaged something, which is crazy. Crazy awesome. The other thing is that effects, they require a cast check. You have to actually make a skill check in order to do it. Now, you can also spend mana to do all kinds of things. You can spend mana to make the cast so that no one realizes you cast it. You can make you have to realize that this 1d6 is, in essence, I believe, a touch damage. You have to touch someone in order to do that damage. If you want to make that spell do other things, I'm going down here. Here's a table that shows if I want to make it a bolt, I've got to add a mana, right? And now I can do multiple targets, or I can do a cone, or I can do a cube, or I can do distance. Like, there's different things to make it do what you want it to do, right? If I want to make a fireball that explodes in the distance, I'm going to shoot from here, and then it's going to go there. It's going to cost X amount of mana. And that's what makes these spells very simplistic, because you can, and I'd say simple, but I don't mean simple as in, silly. I mean simple as in, like, I'm going to make this bigger so you can see this. This is burn. Burn. You do target, you do CD4 damage, which I guess is the cast or the mana, right? For the duration or until it is submerged in water. So I believe that's the effect. No, that's the cast. So now if you look at this, this is in essence this is very similar to DC 20, where he talks about this one spell becomes Firebolt, Flame, or Fireball, Firebolt, Ray of Burning Hands, etc. It all kind of can be the same thing. You're doing fire. It's just a matter of how much mana you pump into it. And I think that's really cool. Now I put this note here. There's a lot of spells. So I think a wizard had their skill plus half their level. So if you're first level and you actually get that 7 and your logic is 7, Does that mean you have 8 spells to start the game with? I could be wrong on that. And that could be awesome for a wizard that you have 8 freaking spells. That might have been mana, but I thought it said spells. Anyways, moving on. Other cool things I thought. If you see these numbers at the bottom in the middle of the book, right here, they're D6s. So you could thrum your finger across the book and stop, and you've got a D6. So I thought that was really fun. And then I already mentioned that enemies, frontline, midline, backline, I thought that was great. And here's the character sheet, so you can get a quick look. And the playtest actually has a digital version of this that is automated. It all automatically fills in. And so that hopefully gives you a brief overview of Vagabond. I hope I didn't screw anything up. If I did, hopefully I screwed it up in a way that sounds awesome to you. And don't worry, because whatever I screwed up, it's probably more awesome the way it's actually told. Now, if you go to Gamefound, it has this, and it has a playtest. I didn't go to the very bottom of this because there's like an actual quest. And the other things that are in here, I believe, is you have the hero record, and you have this quest sheet. I didn't go into this at all, but there's a ton of other things in terms of travel and time. He goes through progress maps. He goes through dungeon creations. He goes through a lot of stuff, right? They really tried to give you all the tools in your toolbox. I focus mostly on character creation and combat when I'm going through these mechanics, because I think that's what a lot of people end up doing. But they definitely tried to automate and make simple some of the other stuff that GMs have to do, and so I like that. Anyways, that is Vagabond. Hit the bell, hit the subscribe button. I got a Patreon now, so join the Patreon. Jump on in. And I'll talk to you guys later.